I'm Liz Morris. I'm the Deputy Director at the Center for Work-Life Law. I have spent the last 8 or so years focused on work and family to advance Work-Life Law's mission of ensuring that all people are able to care for their family members without jeopardizing their economic security. And of those 8 years, I was either pregnant, breastfeeding, sometimes both. And now I am a mother to a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, so two fairly young children. And as any working mom can tell you, it is hard. My family is the most important thing in the world to me. My job is very important to me as well. And, juggling it all, there's a physical toll, there's an emotional toll, there's a financial toll. And yet I have it easier than most family caregivers. I have a flexible, stable job. I have coworkers who are actually professionally committed to supporting mothers. I have plenty of sick days. I know what my legal rights are. I have a spouse and he is an equal co-parent. My own mother is still healthy and living independently. And I am very grateful for all of these things. And still, it's ridiculously hard. And I think that as a mother, it can be hard sometimes to see that that's not because of my own personal failings as a mother or my failings as an employee. It's hard because of systemic policy failures in this country. And, there's no question that the system is failing mothers, it's failing other caregivers. And in many cases, quite literally, caregivers are being forced to choose between taking care of their loved ones and keeping the paying jobs that they need to survive. Family caregiver discrimination can take many forms, but at its core, it is unfair treatment or worse treatment of somebody who is taking care of a family member typically based on assumptions about how that person is going to behave or stereotypes about what that person should be doing or not doing. It can have devastating health and economic consequences for workers and their families. It impacts parents of all genders, people who are caring for ill or disabled or aging family members, people who are pregnant, who are breastfeeding, really anybody who has the responsibility for providing care for another person. For example, it could look like a supervisor who is demoting a pregnant employee because he fears that she's no longer going to be committed to her job after the baby is born. It could look like a dad who is fired 3 days after he returns from paternity leave because his boss believes that, well, he took 12 weeks off and men should be prioritizing work over newborn care. Like, can't your wife be doing that? It can look like a person who's suffering from postpartum depression being told that they can't take leave to recover for their medical issue, while HR is granting leave to one of their colleagues who needs time off because they've suffered from a heart attack. It can look like a supervisor refusing to promote the person who is the most qualified employee, who's next in line for promotion. If that person is a mother, because of assumptions that that person isn't going to want to take the business trips that are necessary for this new position. It can also be the hiring team just not calling back the person who otherwise would have gotten the job after the hiring team learns that that person's spouse has a disability, because then the hiring team is concerned that that's going to be a distraction or the insurance costs are going to go up. So there's lots of different ways that it can come up, but it is typically based on assumptions, negative stereotypes, and bias against family caregivers. People are being driven into poverty because of common life events like having a baby or having an elderly parent who's experiencing, a serious medical issue. But it does disproportionately impact women, people of color, LGBTQ plus folks, and low wage workers. It's no secret that women are more likely to provide care. We saw during the pandemic the incredible impact on women of color, especially, who lost pay, lost their jobs entirely because of their caregiving responsibilities. Yeah, I think it's interesting. Most people are familiar with the gender wage gap, but I think it's not as widely known that bias against mothers is the strongest form of gender bias against women in the workplace. And it is largely responsible, bias against mothers is largely responsible for the gender pay gap. And this motherhood penalty is actually most severe for low income women. Also, people of color and immigrants are more likely to live in multi-generational households. They're also more likely to provide direct care to their family members when they need it, as compared to sort of outsourcing care. And so, naturally, they're more likely to experience that form of discrimination. Women of color are, on an individual level, treated worse when they have caregiving responsibilities as compared to white women. So, for example, a white woman may be just excused for a late arrival to work that was caused by her dropping her child off at school. The perception is, well, she's being a good mother. That's fine. Whereas a Black woman who does the exact same thing might be hyper scrutinized for tardiness, disciplined, because she's perceived as not working hard enough. And then finally, there is no federal law that explicitly prohibits discrimination against family caregivers. But at the Center for Work-Life Law, our researchers found that 1 out of every 3 American workers is actually covered already by either a state or local law that prohibits caregiver discrimination. Now, of course, the flip side of that is that 2 out of every 3 workers in this country still needs that protection. The pandemic made clear that family caregivers are struggling, but this is not a new issue. Discrimination against family caregivers existed long before COVID-19, and it will undoubtedly continue unless we put in place the legal protections that folks need now. The primary point of opposition is that these laws are going to impose new burdensome obligations on employers, and they're going to trigger an onslaught of costly litigation. They're just lining the pockets of plaintiffs' lawyers. In California, for example, the opposition was led by the Chamber of Commerce. But these business concerns are truly unfounded. Caregiver discrimination, I'll explain why. Caregiver discrimination is already illegal in many cases under other laws, like the Family and Medical Leave Act, or the FMLA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, Title VII's prohibition on sex discrimination and race discrimination. But the problem is that frontline supervisors, sometimes even HR professionals, don't really understand, because it's complicated, but sort of the complex way in which these laws give rights to family caregivers. And so as a result, we are seeing that employers are running afoul of these laws when it comes to family caregivers. And so caregiver anti-discrimination laws have the benefit of providing clarity to employers. And that clarity has the potential not only, of course, to reduce discrimination, but actually also to avoid litigation. And there is empirical evidence that that's true. The Center for Work-Life Law reviewed all of the cases that were filed in those states that do have caregiver discrimination laws on the books already, and found that the likelihood an employer is going to be sued under one of these laws is 0.001%. An individual business owner is over 5 times more likely to be struck by a lightning in their lifetime than they are to be sued under one of these laws. And so this concern about rampant litigation is just unfounded. Um, and then there's also a really strong business case for not discriminating against family caregivers and broader benefits for our economy, especially during the current labor shortage, because caregiving responsibilities is one of the primary reasons why women leave the workforce. Four states already have these laws on the books for private employers. That's Alaska, Delaware, Minnesota, and New York. And then in this past year, we saw bills that were active in California, in Illinois, in New Jersey, actually a stronger law introduced or bill introduced in New York, and also in Pennsylvania. These laws prohibit employers from discriminating against family caregivers, meaning that employers can't fire, refuse to hire, fail to promote, harass a worker because of the fact that they provide care for a family member. And so employers can't treat family caregivers worse based on stereotypes and assumptions. They have to, treat them based on their job performance. And then the California bill does one extra thing that I think is really important to mention, which is that it requires reasonable accommodations, things like time off, schedule changes, when those accommodations or changes at work are needed because a worker has to provide care when their family member's school or other kind of care facility is unexpectedly closed. My first piece of advice to legislators who are considering this type of legislation is do it. It is so important, and it speaks to so many core values of progressives today. And we really need more lawmakers showing up for mothers and other caregivers and for people who need care. So my first piece of advice is go for it. My more sort of strategic advice, once you've decided to go for it, is to be aware going into it that this is not necessarily a familiar issue for people. It's not an issue that's always intuitive to people. And so really thinking through at the outset how you're going to educate the public and other lawmakers about what caregiver anti-discrimination law will accomplish. It's important to really explicitly connect the dots between these anti-discrimination laws and sort of the larger work family agenda, the other core values that progressives care about, like gender, racial, and economic justice. So I think that, of course, when you're advancing legislation, skilled communication is always important. But I think it's especially critical with these bills, both to explain sort of the mechanics of how the law actually works and to illustrate what the problem is and how it's connected to those values that we care about. Center for Work-Life Law, we have on our website a model policy, a list of existing state and local laws. Please contact us directly. We love to think through what solutions might work in a particular state. We have resources for messaging. This policy focus on discrimination against caregivers and more broadly just a focus on the need of family caregivers is really gaining traction now. I think in large part because of the visibility during the pandemic of the struggles faced by caregivers. And the Center for Work-Life Law has been a leader in this field since 1997. And so we are here to support, to share lessons learned over the many years. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us.